All right. So thank you for joining us this evening. We're excited to talk about Flight of the Rondone with author Patrick Girondi. If you're watching online and have questions, please post them in the chat. And for those of you who are in the room with me, be thinking about what you want to ask, and we'll get to everyone's questions at the end of the program. So I'm going to start by introducing Patrick. He is originally from the South Side of Chicago and is an Italian-American singer, songwriter, author, and founder of San Rocco Therapeutics. He has released 5 albums and is also the author of Diamond in the Rough. He has led his company, San Rocco Therapeutics, since 1993 with the mission to cure sickle cell disease, thalassemia. I'm so glad to have you here. Do you want to start with a brief overview of the book, and then we'll kind of do some questions?
Sure. So Rondone, actually, the last word is an Italian word. It's a bird that flies up from South Africa each year, lands in our town in Italy in about March, and it travels at about 140 miles an hour, or up to 140 miles an hour. The thing particular about it is that it has really long wings and a short body. And so it always has to land on high, because if it lands on the ground, it has no way to take off again. So people in my town, we know when we find a rondone on the ground that we have to take it into our hands, clasp it, and then throw it as high as we possibly can, so that it can begin flapping its wings and flying before it hits the ground. So in my life, I'm a high school dropout, and I had a lot of issues as a youngster. There were so many people who, picked me up and threw me back up into the air. And so I named the book after all of those people that helped me out all of my life. I mean, eventually, I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show twice as Rags to Riches Story, and I was in Playgirl magazine with my clothes on, with Brian Boitano, with Magic Johnson, with Sylvester Stallone. So I lived, this wonderful life, this American dream. And I honor the people that helped me with the title of the book, Rondone.
I love that connection. I remember in the book where you talked about throwing one up into the air, and I kind of wondered if that was kind of the connection that you were using with the title. So yeah. I really enjoy that. So let's talk about how this book is kind of your part of this book is a discussion about your fight to find a drug or a cure for one of your children who's ill. Let's talk about how a drug or therapy gets approved for use for those people who don't know. Can you talk about how the process works from the beginning stages of an idea to the acceptance by a government body?
Sure. So, every product begins out as an idea, and usually this idea is experimented in cells, in petri dishes. And if it goes well, then it's moved to mice, and then sometimes dogs or pigs, or eventually Makai chimps, maybe. And then finally, when you feel that you have enough evidence that it will do no harm and possibly do some good, you go to the FDA with your initial new drug application, and you file, and hopefully you will be approved to begin clinical trials. Clinical trials are using your product for the first time in humans. So there's basically 3 phases of clinical trial. The first is do no harm. The second is efficacy, and the third is dosaging. So if you can treat, it depends on how many people have the disease as to how large the patient population will be. The patient population in some rare diseases, such as thalassemia, could be 30 people, could be up to thousands for other types of disease. And once you have done no harm, and you are beginning to see some efficacy. That gives you the reasons to go forward. And finally, if you're curing people, then you ask for approval.
And how long in roughly are we talking about time frame? Years?
I mean,
Okay.
my product was invented probably around 1990. Here we are in 2023. I'm going to announce something that only on your show, actually, it's the first time I'm announcing this. In my book, the nemesis and the people that sabotage my product, etc. I used a pseudo name for them because of advice from legal people at the publisher, but actually the real company's name is Bluebird Bio, and they just got approved at $2.8 million per patient to treat people. It's kind of a mess because I don't believe it's the safest drug necessarily, but we hope that it'll help patients. But my drug was invented around 30 years ago by a brilliant researcher at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. His name is Michel Settling, and Bluebird Bio sabotaged the product, and lo and behold, end up with a product that costs over $2 million more than we would have ever charged had we had our product approved in the United States. Now, we're pushing forward as well. Bluebird has something called orphan drug exclusivity, which means that in the United States, they shouldn't have any competition for 7 years. I mean, this is kind of crazy because there's, 105,000 thalassemia and sickle cell disease patients in the United States. And if they all got treated at 2.8 million, the whole government would be bankrupted. But the FDA's attitude is that it's not their business to decide what people should charge. And they also don't care if people are robbing, stealing, whatever they're doing to each other to get their product approved. I wrote a citizen's petition where I explained everything that had happened. And basically that was the attitude and the answer I got back from the FDA. I'm talking with a couple of attorney generals, but not every crime can always be, we watch Shkreli. I was talking with an attorney general's office today about Shkreli, and they were saying that, he nearly got away, that they started looking at him in 2015 and they really couldn't figure out how to do it. And finally in 2017, then it went after him. And I believe that Nick Leshley, the ex-CEO of Bluebird Bio, I believe Bluebird Bio, a lot of people from Bluebird Bio that include Third Rock Ventures will eventually be looking at the legal system, I hope, anyway. But the sad thing is that research is costly, but not as costly as everybody says that it is. So Bluebird was approved at 2.8 million, which in my opinion is at least 2.1 million more than it should cost. Gene therapy for one patient, the tops that it would cost, and I know the system well, would be 300,000 a patient. So how the government and the authorities think it's okay for a company to make $2.5 million per patient in profit, I have no idea. And the biggest problem that we have in the pharmaceutical industry today, or one of many of the big problems, is that, even the smallest pharmaceutical company is paying his CEO, is compensating his CEO $1.5 million. So by the time you compensate him and all of the other C's that are with him, and you compensate the board, and I mean, and all of these compensations are going into research. They claim that that's the cost of doing research.
Right.
You need a company, so you got to pay all of these people all of this money, but in the end, because of this, very little money gets to research. So my company, I have my son, and that's why I got involved. John Walton of Walmart was my partner for 9 years. John's no longer with us, but a wonderful man. And for 9 years, the Walton family invested $20 million. Never got their money back, just invested it, and that was it. And for me, I was the head of my company. Now you could say for 23 years that I've been the head for the most part. And I didn't take a salary until 2022, and my salary is, I think, $150,000 a year. So for 2 years, I get $150,000. So it's $300,000 that I've gotten over 22 or 23 years. And not to say that I'm criticizing people. People need to make money. People need to make salaries. People need to pay their bills and feed their kids. That's right. I agree. But it's just gotten ridiculous now. I mean, there's, these CEOs of these tiny companies who have no products. I was talking with an analyst about 6 months ago, and he was telling me about this great little company that they had this product that would help eliminate the need for chemotherapy when you do bone marrow transplants. And I was very excited about it. And I looked into the company, and I called him back and I said, "You said it's a great company. What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, what do you mean, Pat?" And I said, "Well, they've got a market cap of about 20 million. And the CEO made $1.7 million last year. I mean, how is that a good company? How is that CEO doing the right thing by, it's a woman actually, by her patients, by her investors, etc." So I don't want to go on, but Jennifer, your show is the only show where I've let people know that in the book, Vulture X is really Bluebird Bio, and they just got approved at $2.8 million per patient.
It's so crazy. You mentioned Martin Shkreli, and that's kind of a question I had a lead in on about, we've heard a lot about him. There's another company that they've done a documentary on, Valiant, that would go and buy these orphan drugs, and then they jack up the price 500, 600%, because it's about making a profit. And it's interesting to me that Big Pharma is allowed to do that, because like Shkreli, right, he actually got convicted on securities fraud. He did not get convicted about anything to do with
like Al Capone,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And should be, if not now out this year, I think is going to be released in the next couple of years. But you've had experience with FDA, you've kind of talked about that, but can you kind of talk about how Big Pharma goes and looks out for these little drugs, and then they buy them up and make them almost impossible for people to use?
One of the articles, there's a couple articles that really helped out with the book. One was by Eugene McCarthy, a professor at Georgetown. So it's not the Eugene McCarthy from the 50s. And actually, he wrote an incredible article that used RICO against pharma executives. And there's another one, and I'm going to forget the exact people that wrote it. The head writer was a woman, and it told about how the pharmaceutical companies use predatory practices to take over small products. So it estimated that 7% of all transactions were made to shelve products, or, so you bought them. They might have been better than your product, but maybe you were further ahead in research. So you did not want, economically, it was disadvantageous for you to get the better product to the patients. Or so they basically would buy these products, which they knew were better, and shelve them. We actually during court, we saw that Bluebird Bio had wanted to do that to ours. So back in 2011 or 12, there were some PowerPoints between Third Rock Ventures and Bluebird Bio, and they admitted that our product was 3 to 5 times better, but that they would go ahead with their product because of time to market. And so you're 100% right that when these large pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes they don't have to be super large, they move in and they will try to buy up every molecule or patent or similar drug to their own, so tomorrow they don't have to worry about competition.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I am an asthmatic, and there's a shot that I get every couple of months that's $70,000. It's crazy, and they're always like, "Oh, well, we have this. We offer this patient in you know, this patient insurance thing where, you know, you might qualify, and we only charge your insurance company, you know, a couple $1,000s, which is kind of how it works out for me. But it's just crazy to me
Criminal.
that's the cost for a single shot that you get every 2 months.
It's criminal.
You know,
I remember, and I'm sure you do too, remember the movie Wall Street, and I think it was in 1996 that they made it. But, to me, it was kind of weird. When the Orphan Drug Act came into play in 1983, it was a wonderful, wonderful act. And it helped a lot of people get cured, because back then nobody was working on orphan diseases, and it gave all of these stimulants to do that. But back in 1983, I don't think anyone ever imagined that a pharmaceutical company would be so unscrupulous as to ask, whatever they could get for their product. And in 1996, we had Wall Street, and Gecko gets on, he says, greed is good. And, I hate to say it, but I live in the United States, and I go back and forth between the United States and Italy, where I also have a home. Unfortunately, it's it appears to be the prevalent belief that greed is good, and that, we are here just to accumulate as much wealth as we can and have a good time. And, the hell with it. I mean, you look at the Sackler family with OxyContin, they claim there's 1 million people dead. And what happens? Sackler's made about 14 billion, and all they have to do is give 4.5 billion back. Nobody goes to jail. These mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers that cried their eyes out at the funerals of their loved ones. And it's just, well, okay, we'll pay a fine. Vioxx was another one. Merck, they lost about 60,000 people due to heart attacks because of Vioxx. Merck knew that these patients were having had a 6 times better chance to have a heart attack, and they got away with it. Paxil was Glaxo. And, we had 100,000 kids commit suicide. And the interesting thing in the book is it tells the story that the CEO of Paxil, whose name is Jan Leschly, back then, and Paxil was fined $3 billion in 2012, the largest fine ever, by the way. I don't know if it's been beaten yet. But Nick Leschly, the CEO of Bluebird, is Jan Leschly's son. Like father, like son. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And obviously, if you see your father making tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in an unscrupulous way, and just, if dad did it, why shouldn't I do the exact same thing? And it's unfortunate, the whole situation. And I really regret that in the book, I didn't use the real names, but I decided today, when I realized that I was on your show tonight, and I said, you know what, in the great state of Texas, Fort Worth, we're going to basically let everyone know that Ultra X is really Bluebird Bio, and that Nick Leschly is the culprit.
And what what do you think about the therapy that they've approved outside of the cost? Do you
Yeah.
feel like it's helpful? Do you
Yes.
worry about it?
Yeah. I mean, they've had some issues with myelodysplastic syndrome and leukemia. The FDA, by the way, I love the FDA. I think they do a wonderful job. Overall, they've got a tough job. It's not easy. They halted the clinical trials of Bluebird different times. I believe that the product may be better with an insulator on it, and we are now putting an insulator on our product. It's a similar product to Bluebird. We use the wild type beta globin gene, where Bluebird uses a mutant gene, but sometimes a mutant gene is better. I mean, I think that the product ought to help a lot of people, and I hope it'll be fine. I think ours is safer and obviously a lot less expensive. And we're going to do our best to get out there swinging, and hopefully we'll be able to convince people with with our results that the orphan drug exclusivity, which Bluebird holds, can be defeated. And the way that you're able to do that is because our product is different than theirs. Hopefully it'll be different enough, because the FDA has been handed down a couple of defeats. There were very recently, and I'm not going to remember the names of everything, but I think it was Catalent has the orphan drug exclusivity for a product, and a tiny company started selling a similar product, a generic, let's say, for 10% of the price of Catalent. And Catalent took the company to court and defeated them and said that, orphan drug exclusivity, you can't mess with it. It doesn't matter how much they charge, et cetera, et cetera. I think that the politicians and the leaders of the country ought to go back and redo the Orphan Drug Act. And recently, I was talking with the president of an organization called ICER. ICER, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a good organization. And they basically say what the price of a product is, what's reasonable for the price of the product to be. And they approved 2.8 million. And I said, so I wrote to the president, Steve Pearson, nice guy. And I said, Steve, how are you guys doing this? It costs way less, in my opinion, than 300,000 per patient to make. How do you think the 2.5 million profit is fair per patient? And he said, we really don't look at what it costs to make. He said, what we look at is that if we have a thalassemia or sickle cell disease patient who lives basically to be 50 years old, and you spend $120,000 on them per year, 50 times 120,000, 6 million, and 2.8 million is less than half of 6 million. So we think it's a good investment for the government and the pharmaceutical companies. And that was his explanation.
That's interesting that they calculate prices by lifespan as opposed to how much it costs to produce.
Yeah, I mean,
I've never heard that. That's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they do it. And I mean, in the end, and I'm kind of I can be sarcastic, and I said, yeah, but if we didn't drink water, we get dehydrated. We have to go into the hospital. They have to give us IVs, and it could be tens of thousands of dollars. So, should a glass of water cost $2,000? I mean, where does it stop? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, the guys that invented insulin donated it.
Yep.
What is that? I mean, it's literally insane.
Yeah.
And it's especially insane for me because, I was a street kid, a shoe shine kid. And, I probably thought I was pretty tough. I don't think I really was. I boxed a little bit. I had one prize fight, which I lost. But for me, at least growing up, I would never rob anything off anybody who was poor. I mean, I always tried to help whoever I could in my own way. But to, in a certain sense, I don't know that I ever looked up to business people, because I probably didn't. Even when I ended up by luck, I ended up on the Chicago Board of Trade and Chicago Board of Option Exchange. I was eventually a member of New York Stock Exchange, had a Swiss banking license, member of Eurex. I did all of these things. And when I got involved, I can't say that I necessarily looked up to these business titans, but I did have respect for them, because I accepted that they were where they were, because in a certain sense, they deserved to be where they were. Dealing with pharmaceutical companies, it's I completely shattered that thought.
I think that's interesting that I kind of grew up that way, where you should respect those people, and they've worked hard to get where they are, and all of that. But then as you my previous profession before I was a librarian I was actually in the financial services industry. And so I've worked for several of the big three banks, which has a lot of the same issues that big pharma have, right?
Of course.
There's been all this stuff with Wells Fargo, and how many times can they get in trouble for stealing from their customers, right? I think once I started kind of working in that industry, it was very much this, wait, this stuff doesn't work the way that I always thought that these things work. And I've worked for several of the big three banks, and there's several that I've worked for that, like, within months was like, I think we're committing fraud. Like, we're doing things that I think are not actually legal. And I think that happens a lot in pharma too. Not as much that people understand, but I think as prices go up and up, right, regular people are understanding more and more kind of how it's rigged against them, right? That you have to do this case by case basis to get this personal kind of payback from the insurance company, sometimes to pay for medication. So if they can do it for 50, 100 people, why can't they just do that? Why can't they charge that charge for everyone, right?
Right.
It's interesting. And you've mentioned this, so you're kind of an unlikely CEO of a gene therapy company, and you've had a pretty unusual life. What do you think gave you the wherewithal to take on the pharma industry?
I think my mother's a devout Catholic, and I always grew up in the shadows of the church and the saints. I learned at a very young age that legal didn't necessarily mean moral. And I kind of go by a saying that you'll have read in the book, where I said that God's law is mandatory, man's law is optional. And I really believe that, because, like most people, I come from humble beginnings. I never whine or cry about anything. As a matter of fact, I think people that come from humble beginnings, I think people that were poor when they were younger, etc., are actually the elite people. Those are really the people that maybe owe something back to the other people who grew up, privileged. Because I can tell you that, being a shoe shine and washing dishes in the hospital kitchen at 15, being in the military, enlisted at 16, and in the military at 17, all of that. I mean, it just really helped me see, the reality of life, and that I'm really nobody. And I never really had a lot of fear, because I always said, well, okay, what's the worst case scenario? I'll go back to shoe shining or loading trucks. I loaded trucks. My good partner, Joe Feldman, in the trading industry, when things would get tough, he said, well, you know what, we'll quit. We'll open up a beef stand, I mean, and I think that was the thing that really saved my life hundreds of times, save you from becoming arrogant, save you from becoming indifferent, just reminding you every day that, you are no one. and you literally owe respect and kindness to everyone. And I have a lot of our patients are Muslim or Jewish or whatever they are, Hindus, a lot of Hindus. And I have never have a problem with any of them. I appreciate them all. And, from time to time, I'll tell them a little story, I'll say, well, Jesus, he's kind of like Socrates, Socrates didn't have to eat that hemlock. Jesus, he could have said, hey, you know what? Don't put me on the cross. I will, you can rob the poor. You can do whatever it is you want. I promise I'll keep my mouth shut. And he, like Socrates, I believe, could have, not lost his life that way. But both of them loved their morals, their principles. And so therefore, mankind, more than they loved their own life. And so I would say that my dear mother and her staunch Catholic beliefs helped me have the, I don't want to say audacity, because I don't think it's audacity, the stupidity maybe to take on Big Pharma. Maybe that's better.
So I'm going to kind of deviate a little bit. Let's talk about, you are kind of an unlikely author as well. Let's talk about your writing process.
Okay.
So do you have a certain routine that you follow when you write? Do you just kind of sit down and go with it as it comes? Do you do certain things to get you kind of in the frame of mind that you need to do to write?
All right, I'll predicate that just to give you a little, just to give our followers a little bit more idea of where I am as a writer. So I've won a couple of awards for my screenplays as well. The Flight of the Rondone was on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list in July. I have a second book coming out called New City in February, so next month. And I just made a deal with Skyhorse Publishing, and they're going to do 3 more of my books.
Ooh, nice.
So how did I write, or how do I write? First of all, I think I've been a writer all of my life. I remember writing my first song when I was 8 or 9 years old for my mother. It was for her birthday. It was called Drumbeat. I still hear it, Oh, I love you with the drum beat. I care for you all the time, as long as the drum beat and all of my life, I kind of jotted stuff down, and I loved little stories. And I think the biggest advantage to me as a writer was that I always observed, always. I would watch if a guy, changed his tie once a week on the floor, or every day, or what color socks he wore. Did he always wear the same color socks? And I always, would watch, and if he traded a lot of contracts, did his lips start quivering, his mustache maybe, he, all of these kind of crazy things. And so I think my first advice to anyone who wants to write is to concentrate and observe everything and anything, because you could write an interesting article about a cockroach that you saw running under the table, but you just need to observe all of the different details, and that's the first thing. So I always was a big observer. And maybe because I was lucky enough to be thrown into situations for adults at a very young age where you really weren't able to talk, or you couldn't fight, or whatever you could do. So you kind of just had to observe. But I observed everything. And then when I would sit down and write, I would always be very noteful, or very cognizant of all of the details. So if I'm going to start to write a story, I will put down who the people in the story, and then I'll put a detailed description of each person. I will try to almost always give each person some kind of a goofy quality about them. I do that as a habit, to separate them from the rest of the world, not even to separate them from the rest of the people in the story, but for the rest of the world. And it's easy for me to do that because I've always been so observant. So I've seen, like all of us, hundreds, thousands of different crazy things that people do, idiosyncrasies. The difference is that if you are cognizant about concentrating on them, you'll remember them. And so I do that, and then I begin my story, and I don't outline it per se. I think that my last book, which I probably finished writing maybe 2 years ago, I'm going to guess, but I think I did use an outline a little bit more on that one than I ever did in any of the other ones. But usually I just start writing, and that's it. And I go back and I read it, and I go back and I read it. Flight of the Rondone is 130,000 words. I know for sure that I counted 17 rewrites on my part. 17 that I counted. So that might have been, there's another 4 or 5 that I didn't count. So yes, I would say my style, or what I'm trying to tell other people, is first of all to be very observant every moment that you're awake, and a lot of times when you're sleeping. And I've heard people say sleep with a pen next to your bed. I would agree with that, because I've had so many times where great ideas come to me when I'm sleeping, and if I don't write them down, I forget them. And then I'm lucky enough sometimes that they do come back, and that's how I remember that. Wow, I was supposed to write that down, I didn't, but I got lucky it came back. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I think about writing usually.
I love that. I love that people usually fall in 2 camps. Either they're obsessive plotters and they outline obsessively, or they're just kind of free flow writing, and and then they go back and edit. So talk about the editing process.
Yeah. So all right. So that's the toughest part of it. Writing is a joy. Anybody that likes to write, we all know that, we could sit down and write for 40 hours, and it's like, it's great. The tough part's going back and editing it. And since, you have to be your own editor. I don't think anybody in the world could afford to write, at least initially, and not be their own editor, because when you get to the point of a line editor, or if you get a point to, I don't even know, it's right before the line editor, concept editor, maybe, you've got to go to them with a book that's it's done. It's edited, and you've edited it, like I said, 17 times. Now, when I was dealing with my publisher on the first book, they made me, in the contract, I had to get an editor, and they recommended an editor to me, and I did use that editor. Good editor. But the book was already done. So right. It was actually it was a wonderful woman from Texas, who worked for this editor, and oh my God, she was just talented and brilliant, and she was just incredible. And then unfortunately, about halfway through the book, she left the editor. And then I got another guy, was good, but not as good as she was. So that the problem is, and I'm working with actually one of my friends who's writing a book about that, when they cornered the onions or onions, and then one time they cornered silver because he's an old Board of Trade guy, and he's fixated on writing this book about all of these old, financial scandals. And I think it's a great idea. But so editing, you need to be your own editor. I mean, don't even think about taking it to an editor until you literally, and maybe you're, and I'm sure, I'm not too talented. So, I had to do mine 17 times, right? That I remember. I mean, maybe there are some people out there that can do it 3 times or 5 times, and that's great. But until they go through the book and aren't changing, and I'm not talking about a comma or a period, but they're not changing, major things, it's not edited. And I know kind of when it's ready to go is when I start throwing in my mind, well, should I use the word important or tantamount? And I say, I guess it's done.
I think I'm done.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I love that. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up for audience questions. So for those of you online, if you have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. So can you talk anything about your new book that you just...
Yes. I love it. I love it. So when I was growing up, in the back of the yards area in Chicago on the South Side, I lived in 15 different houses, so I lived in a bunch of different neighborhoods. But my good buddy, his name is Davey, and me and Davey were shoe shines together. And I'm kind of a short-lived Italian guy, but he was kind of a big, tall, muscular Polak, and wonderful guy, by the way. And I moved away and went to the military and lived on my life. But Davey stayed in that area when the community turned into a mostly African-American community. And he became like a sage. Everybody loves him. I put in there, he fixes everything from broken pipes to broken hearts.
Aww.
And it's actually based on his life story. And the area is very close to the downtown of Chicago. And so the city actually would like that area. And most of the people living in that area are not paying their taxes. They can't afford to. And the city becomes predatorial and starts writing tickets for grass, tickets for garbage, tickets for no sign on your property, tickets for no fence. And so you've got probably 1 out of 5 of these homes in this area where they're worth $5,000 or $10,000, but they owe $100,000 in back taxes. And so I then go a little off, and Davey and his next door neighbor Napoleon have this dream about moving to the country 3 hours from Chicago in Greencastle, Indiana. And so that's the story basically. And it's very human. I'm sure I'm going to be called a male chauvinist or racist, or I mean, all of the things that today everybody's called something, because I like talk about realistically how it is in these areas for the people that live in these areas, not how we want a virtual signal maybe, and it should be. No, this is how it is. And if you really don't like it, it's not really my fault. And because I write about it, because I write kind of crudely, I welcome you to call me whatever you like. I really don't care, but I think it's a great book.
Well, I'm excited for that. That sounds really interesting. All right, we have an audience question. So I see you're also a musician and have some concerts coming up in New York. Can you talk about those and your band, Patrick Girondi and the Orphan's Dream? Okay,
so the Orphan Dream Band, it's anyone, I played with a lot of great musicians, and I, performed at the Harris Theater in Chicago, and I won a couple of awards. I was the Indie Singer of the Year in 2008. I don't want to go into it, but and so for me, the orphan dream is that, the people with the orphan diseases would love to be cured. And my band is like the orphan dream band, man. We're here. We'd love to cure you. Many of my songs are written about people with orphan diseases. Each of my albums begins with orphan. So Orphan's Soul, Orphan's Journey, Orphan's Hope, Orphan's Cure, Orphan's Return, Orphan's Final Chapter. My band over the years has been 40 or 50 musicians. In New York, it will be a guy named George Schatzeline. And the drummer is Sam, I want to say Corselli. Very young guys. I think they're both in their early 20s. I shipped them all of the spartita, I don't know how to say it in English. I shipped them all of the chords for my songs and all of that. And they've been studying, and we've done 2 practices. We're doing another practice on Sunday. And the venue is Pianos in Manhattan on Ludlow. On the second night, we will be awarding the 7th annual Orphan Dream Award. In 2016, a family in Chicago that lost 2 children to Batten's disease they gave me a gift as a Versace jacket and asked me to sing for their children. I told a story to Megan Euchre, who was an incredible artist, very well known and an incredible artist. And Megan made a bronze statue for the family. And then she made more of the bronze statues. And now every year we award to somebody who we believe has done an outstanding job in the orphan diseases. So the head of the health department, he wasn't the head of the health department before. When he won, Franco Locatelli won, actually, and then he later became the head of the health department. Michelle Sedlin, who is an incredible scientist, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, won. John Tisdale, an NIH scientist, incredible, won. This year, I can't tell you who won because it's a surprise. We'll find out. I know, but on June 19th, we'll find out. And we're going to do something a little different as well. So both of the nights, any of the funds that are raised there and any money that I would get for performing all goes to Cooley's Anemia International of New York, a wonderful organization who has donated well over $1 million into gene therapy over the years. So that's a little bit about my group. I'm a singer-songwriter. I play the harmonica. I'm not saying I sing well. I'm not saying I play the harmonica well, but I think I'm somewhat entertaining. I very often stop and explain songs. I'll be doing 19 of my own songs, 4 covers, and of the 19 of my own songs, 4 or 5 are in Italian. So I'll be explaining those. And it'll be a great time. It's always a great time because, I'm like your uncle at a wedding or something that thinks he can sing and has got the microphone. Everybody has a good time. Some of my stuff is really rock. Other of it is really blues, but that's mostly it. Rock, blues, a little bit of rhythm and blues. And I hope that, people will be there and, that they'll enjoy it near as much as I enjoy it. I always, my friends aggravate me a lot of times, say, what are you doing? And I'll say, well, you want to go golfing, you like going golfing or you like going running and all of that. Well, that's great. I like getting up on stage and I like performing. And like I said, we're 8 billion people on the planet. I'm sure like 7,999,000 can sing much better than I can. But I do my best. I try real hard and I write my own stuff and I hope that the concerts will be fantastic.
That's great. I love that. All right, we've got another question. You've gained a lot of wisdom through many experiences. What advice can you give us?
Wow. Wow. First of all, the person that asked that question answered it in the question. And so in a certain sense, that experience and not only passing experience, but living those experiences. And studying the details again. It goes back to the details. And we become wise. And, you know, I say that when the demons become our angels, that's when we realize, or that's when we are a success in life. So I don't think there is any bad time in life. I mean, we all know that we die in the end. So, and I like the old saying that, you know, a brave man dies once and a coward dies 100 times. So looking back on life, I've been beat up, I've been shot at, I've been arrested. I've had a child diagnosed with a horrible disease and told that he wouldn't live to be 14 years old. And I look back and I didn't have one bad day, and I didn't have one bad thing. You know, when we become victims, it's really our defeat. When I was a kid, Italians, you know, Dago, Wop, Greaseball, Guinea, Goomba. I mean, there's 1,000 names for them. I had a big nose, obviously, or I still do have a big nose, and I was a short little guy and all of that. But any of the discrimination, and there was some, I mean, a lot of times I was discriminated from people that were darker skinned than I was actually. It was great. It made me who I am. It's, you know, we have to stop with this kind of belief and generation of that we're all victims. I mean, if we're all victims, none of us are, first of all. And second of all, being a victim is a great thing. I mean, it makes you stronger. It turns you, you know, into somebody that's, you know, can be infallible and unbeatable. That if we take every hardship and turn it into a wonderful experience and into a victory, and stop all of this victimism stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of my advice.
I actually love that. All right, we have time for one last question. What is next with your projects?
So we are now putting an insulator on our vector at the University of Tennessee with Frank Park, Dr. Park, and at the Southern Illinois University with Dr. Andrew Wilbur. We are now testing it in patients' cells, not patients, patient cells. And we are also tweaking the product so that we'll probably be filing a couple of patent applications. And we hope to be making the product and have a decision made on the IND by the end of the year.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, now we were in patients before anyone actually in the United States. My product was in patients in 2012 November, actually before Bluebird actually was in patients in the United States. And our patients, thank God, we have had no issues. There was a paper published in this year in European Hematology Association that says that 2 out of 3 of our patients have a continued reduction in blood transfusions, 43%. Of course, we want to cure them. We're going to do better. But our product was made way back in 2009 or 10. So we believe just by using a modern way to produce it, the purification, etc., will be incredible. So we're going to push very hard for all of our sickle cell and thalassaemic patients because, you know, we're all one family and, you know, we're all brothers and sisters, and soon I won't be here. So I kind of am in a hurry. I don't say that because I have any like fatal disease or anything, or I hope I don't, but you know, time flies and we need to make every day count, and we will be doing our best. We have a wonderful team, and thanks for the questions. I hope I don't bore anybody.
Well, I am excited for you, and I hope that everything works out with that this year. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you would like to purchase a copy of the book, you can purchase them from the dock here, which is our Fort Worth Independent Bookstore. I'm going to put their information up on the screen here. And we have lots of great author visits and other programs for adults coming up this year. Please check out the events calendar on our website, fortworthlibrary.org. And lastly, we did record this presentation and it will be posted to our YouTube page in about a week. If you subscribe to our page, you'll get notifications as we add new videos for you to enjoy. Thank you so much, Patrick. I enjoyed our conversation
Thank you
today.
very much. Thank
And
you.
have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bless you. Thank you.
Thanks.